And yeah, it is me. All right. So let's get on and talk about here studying, because I think a lot of students, when they think about studying math, and this is something I've talked about in other live streams, that students feel like, oh yeah, I know how to like study math. You know, I get a review. Like, can I just do my review and do like, can I do my review or my study guide and like, I'm good? Can I just review my notes and I'll be good? And if that's how you think that studying needs to be done, then you're going to be misinformed. And I don't want you to follow through that path, because I've seen student after student say the words of like, I spent hours studying for this math test, right? Miss McLogan, like I stayed up all night. I stayed up all week. I didn't study for any other of my exams or any of my other tests. I only studied for yours. And then they would fail it. And that's a really, really hard feeling. Or it's not hard feeling. It's a really, really bad feeling, even as a teacher, because you know the student was like not lying. They actually were doing work. They were doing all the problems. You could tell, like even their parents would, call in like, I need a student or a parent conference, with you, because they spent hours and they would show me all the work and they did so much work. Like this has happened time and time again. And you look at it and, even as a teacher, sometimes you have to reflect like, am I doing this correctly? Like this student did in all this work. Did I give them a bad exam? Like, was that a really good reflection of what they know, what they didn't know? Because you could see the student would spend tons of time and they'd still like bomb it, right? They'd still get an F or a C or a D or, whatever was a bad grade for that student. And I think in my early years, a lot of times, I would take that blame, and I, not say like it's not any like blame. I think anytime, no matter what grade a student got, I always like as a teacher would take, some sort of like blame or responsibility. I think that's really important. You have to, but I don't think I ever thought about just students putting in work. It was just acceptable to me. Like, oh, you did your work. Like that was good enough. Right. But then became as years went on, I started to realize that students just doing math problems was not good enough. Just giving students a review was not good enough. Just saying students to go back and do, study and review their notes was not good enough. And you could spend hours and hours and hours on it and not getting better. So it kind of brings me back to something that's happened, time and time again. And actually, oh my God, what's that Will Smith movie? Oh my God, now I got to like look it up. I wasn't even going to tell the story, but it was something else. Shoot, what is that? What is that movie? Such a good movie. Yeah, The Pursuit of Happiness. Awesome movie. Okay, so, and my story that I was going to think about was just like a general thing. But if you've ever watched The Pursuit of Happiness, it's a really, really good motivational, inspirational, kind of movie. But because this is something that happened to me. Like I remember watching that movie and I can't remember what exactly I got motivated about or motivated to do. But obviously sometimes when you watch those like motivational, inspirational videos, it gets something inside of you that you're like, I can accomplish this. Like there's something I want to do that maybe I haven't done. I'm not reaching my full potential. And you just get very motivated, excited. You're like, I'm going to, conquer the world the next day. Like you want to follow exactly what's going on in the film. And it might not be The Pursuit of Happiness. It might have been like a YouTube video. It might have been another movie. Sometimes it's just, even listening, even a TikTok, like there's certain things that have those like triggering points that they make you think, they make you want to change. And sometimes maybe that like will invoke some change within a week or maybe a month or, maybe the next day. But I remember the first time I watched Pursuit of Happiness, I can't remember what it was, but I remember I had that feeling and there's some things I wanted to do, make some changes on. And then I remember I can't remember if I ever followed through or what I did, from on there, but I do remember the next time I watched that video, it was like maybe a year or two later. And I was like, holy crap, this is such a good movie. And I'm like, since the last time I watched it, like what has changed? Like, did I ever go for I think it was some of my goals, like as far as creating some content or creating some of my online courses. Maybe that's what it was. I think it was like, yeah, I wanted to create a couple like online courses and it just inspired me to go and do it. And then I remember like a year or 2 years had passed and I was like, holy crap, nothing, I didn't do anything. Like I got really uber motivated, right? But then I never really followed through and I just did stuff, right? Again, like I still created videos, like I've created over 12,000 videos, right? From that point, I probably created a couple thousand from those days. And I probably created, maybe some courses, but I never achieved what I actually wanted to achieve. I still did things, but I just didn't do them, I think, with the intention of being able to create what I originally got motivated to be able to accomplish. So where am I coming up with this? Well, the reason why I'm bringing this up to you is because, again, like just watching something and getting motivated doesn't really mean anything unless you actually take action with it. You can same thing, like just because you're learning something or just because you're doing something, if you're not like taking action or applying it, it's not doing anything. It doesn't matter, right? And it's kind of like the same thing, like, you can just do math problems. Like I could do multiplication tables and we could do them 1,000 times, right? But like if that's not applying what you need to be doing, like for your own math test, right? You're not going to be any more prepared. Okay. So what I want to do is really kind of 3 things to help you apply your math apply your studying. Okay. Because what you need to be doing is, yes, learning and reviewing is great. Like, just doing a quick little review of like your notes and like work you're doing, or do some extra practice problems. That's all good. But you got to be able to take the next step. And here's how you can take that next step. So number 1 is you got to have feedback when you're doing math problems. Okay. So I want you to be doing some practice problems. Obviously you're going to be doing your study guide and, stuff like that, but I want you to look past the study guide. Study guide's just, in my opinion, study guides is just like the bare minimum. Like, all right, here's a quick review, guys, do the study guide. And yes, I gave study guides too. I think it was kind of one of those, like, I just felt like I had to, or it was like a best practice, to give students a study guide. But I wouldn't feel like the study guide's the most important. What I would recommend you do is go back through your tests, go back through your quizzes, go back through your homeworks, go back through anything that you have feedback on. And what do I mean by feedback? That you have like the worked out solutions written down, and either your teacher like has corrected them or has given you like the answers like filled out. So you have exactly what the answer is, not just the final answer, but all the worked out solution. Because here's what I want you to do. I want you to go back through your tests and your quizzes and do the problems you know how to do, but also do the problems you got wrong, right? And what I want you to do is take those answers, cover them up, and try to redo them. And if you're taking an exam, like do this for all of them, right? If you're doing a test, then just go back to your quizzes and your homework. But cover up the answers, cover up all the work. Maybe you need 2 sheets of paper so you can't see it, and try to do the problem again, right? Because what you need to do is you need to build up that recall memory. And especially when you're taking exams, sometimes you forgot how to do those problems that you learned at the beginning of the year, right? So it's going to be really important to go back through them, go back through the routines and everything you need to think about of doing those problems. And guess what? Sometimes you're going to get those problems wrong, and you're going to pull the sheet of paper and you're like, oh crap, I got this problem wrong. And so then what you do is like, look at the answer, look how you did it, get a new sheet of paper, cover it back up, and try to do it again. Now, I found this, or I kind of discovered this technique all by myself when I was in college. Actually, was I in college? No, I was in high school. Actually, I don't even know. No, I wasn't in high school. I was in college. I did it in college, but I didn't do it for my homework or my tests. What I used to do it was for like the examples in the book, because that's all I had, or that's at least all I thought about at that point. So I used to go through I did the exact same things, but I tried to cover up the answers and the examples of the book, because I think that's probably, at least in college, that's as much feedback really as I, kind of got besides my notes. So that's what I did. And it wasn't until I started doing like tests and quizzes and homework was I became a teacher, because one thing I hated as a teacher, but was so beneficial, was for me to grade my students' work. And that's why I thought it was always important as a teacher to grade the work, give it back to the students so they could learn from it. Obviously, we know not all students learn from their work, and some did take advantage of it, but I always thought it was important to give back your work. So take advantage of that. If you have work you have feedback on, do practice problems. Yeah, the study guide's great, but redo those problems that you got wrong. Do every single problem that you got wrong. Every single problem that you got wrong on a test, on a quiz, on a homework example, redo them. But also make sure you're following through on the feedback. Like, see what you got wrong, and then see how you corrected it and what you did right, right? And go back through it again and again and again. Not again, again. At least do it, so you can do it right, okay? You don't need to do it a million times. It's going to take too long. But make sure you go back through those problems that you're doing, because having that feedback is going to be crucially important to make sure that you are doing it correctly. Because again, like you could do a whole bunch of problems, you could spend hours, but if you're just doing all the problems wrong, what does that mean? Like, how is this going to be helping you, right? So make sure you have feedback of the problems that are worked out, and go back through those problems you got right and that you got wrong. But it's very, very important to make sure that you are practicing going back through the problems that you have already been assigned in your course. The next thing, which The next thing that I'm a little impartial to, just because maybe that's, something I did in my college years as well as my profession, but it's something that I remember hearing the statement, and I always thought it was so like cliche. Like it's like the same thing when your teacher says that, oh, you guys are my favorite class I've ever had. You're like, come on, really? And or the other one was like, I learn more from you guys than you're learning from me, right? It's like, what are you talking about? Like, come on, that's just cliche stuff. But I can honestly say that the idea of like learning from students or learning each and every year is absolutely true. And, I only taught 14 years, which is a lot in some regards, but very minimal, kind of not a lot in many, many years. And I can honestly say every single year I learned something new about my topic, or learn something new about my concept, or learn something new about teaching just in general. Like every single year you are learning something. And a lot of that comes into like having to express or having to, teach something to somebody else. And I think it's really important. If you want to absorb the information, if you want to have a true understanding of the information, it's so important to be able to have to teach it to somebody else. Now, hopefully what I would recommend you do is have like a study group or a study partner. When I was in college, and because I struggled in math when I was in high school, so when I got to college, I always worked with either a study partner or a study group. And obviously, we weren't practicing like, I'm the teacher, you're the student, like teach me. But like when you talk through problems, you talk together back each other, like you help each other out, you explain your thinking, like you show them what you're doing and how you're doing that work. Like all that teaching is helping your brain kind of systematize and really make sure that you can understand the information. And I remember when I took pre-calculus, here, put it this way. There's kind of three levels of my pre-calculus, right? So when I took pre-calculus in high school, I didn't know anything. I had like studied or cheated, not once I cheated my through, but basically just breezed just gotten by through high school, right? So I took it in high school and I was like, oh my God, I got D's, right? I was just horrible. Then I really got serious about math, about improving my grade. And I took pre-calculus in college and I got an A. Super excited, right? But then once I had to teach pre-calculus, holy crap, my first year teaching pre-calculus was horrible. The students thought I was an idiot. They're like, I remember students were trying to get out of my class left and right because I was teaching horrible. Like they're like, he doesn't make any sense. He's not teaching it correctly. There's a lot of problems. I remember getting tons of problems wrong because I didn't really know how to explain them or how to truly do them. It was bad. It was a mess. And then obviously like as years gone on, and I still would not say I'm like an expert in any pre-calculus, pre-calculus topics, but I can say like I can hold my own for quite a bit of like the application and the understanding a lot of concepts, but that comes from years and years of me teaching. Now, obviously you can't do years and years of teaching when you have a test or an exam coming up, but I think like working with some other people to help to explain what you're doing or explain your thinking is so important. So if you don't have somebody you can teach, somebody you can study with or do your homework with, or you don't have like a study group, then, even think about even make the joke of like, all right, how would you explain this to your little brother or to a little sister, right? There's always like that. I don't think it was Einstein or really attributed to it, but it's like, if you can't explain it to like a third grader, like, it's not complicated enough. There's a couple quotes that are all around that, but it's like, how can you explain this now that's going to get a little bit more into my next point, but like, how can you explain this to somebody else? Right. And maybe like, if you have nobody around, whatever, maybe like there's nobody around you can study with, then fine. Then pretend you're making a YouTube video and record yourself or something like that. And like, explain it, teach it out there. I'm telling you, just going through that process of like, I know how to do it, but now let me explain it. It's like, it's scary. Sometimes you're like, oh crap, I don't really know why. And here's the thing, if you can do this in time before you take your test, if you really have like put yourself on the ball of like, all right, get in front of class, like, all right, I'm going to explain this. There'll be a couple times where you're like, oh, I don't really know why this is it or why this happens or why this happens or how to do this or how to do that. And then those are great questions that you can either research online or go to your teacher. So one thing I used to do, which, students didn't really like this, so I didn't do it very much, but like I would have students actually explain things in class sometimes, like as a review. They'd go up and I'm like, all right, I'm like, explain it. But teacher, like, show me the step, not just show me the steps, but like explain it. And a lot of students hated this for rightful reasons. They didn't want to feel stupid in front of their classmates. But it was extremely important or extremely helpful, at least in my mind, to kind of see where students really didn't understand what they were doing and trying to like gloss over. And I also thought it was really important for students and their learning ability to kind of realize, oh, I actually don't really know why we're doing this or why I'm doing that, right? And then in follow-up lessons, I could dive deeper in with them, right? And I could help them before they took their test. So, you know, if you have never tried teaching it or explaining it to somebody else, like find somebody. Try to like teach math or whatever you're studying or whatever you're doing with them. And I'm telling you, you're going to find a lot of gaps in your understanding. And if you have time before your test, then you know you can kind of take those questions and fill them up. I remember I did something similar to this where I did it with my study group. And then I remember I went to my professor during office hours and I literally just write out all these questions like, why are we doing this? Like, why did I do that? Or how does this work? And he was probably pretty annoyed of me by the end of the semester, but I think he also appreciated that, you know, I wanted to learn the why, the how, stuff like that. I just didn't want to like follow, you know, go through the routine of things because I already did that, right? I already did years and years of studying and not getting the result, just getting by, right? I knew I had to actively be learning and understanding what I was doing. And the third one I think is probably one of the most important and helpful is to take all this information, and especially if you have especially when you have a final exam, right? You got to think of like all this ton of information that you have to now condense down, right? To condense down to like a 1 hour exam or, you know, a 30 multiple choice questions. Like if you look at it from that broad perspective, it almost gets like overwhelming. So one thing that I used to do with all my students is like for every test, we always created a cheat sheet. And students didn't really need a cheat sheet for every single test. They would take all the information, all of the definitions, all of the theorems, the formulas, you know, and any example problems that they thought were like very helpful for them to remember. And I allowed them to write it down on a sheet of paper. Now, roughly like they're condensing. If you're taking all the problems on the quiz and the homework and the notes, like you can't pick everything, right? You have to decide what do you want to, you know, condense down to that sheet of paper. So it was helpful for the test. Like I used, you know, by my end years, I ended up letting students use it on the test. And I thought that was very beneficial, but that's a different video. What was really important was at the end of the year, they were allowed to use a cheat sheet as well as on their, actually, did I allow a cheat sheet on the final exam? I can't remember. There were some years I did. And then I think maybe COVID, I didn't. Actually, you know, I think I did allow them. Yeah, I did allow the cheat sheet because again, like I think the final exam, they had like an hour and 35 questions. Like it's either you know or you don't. You don't really have time to do the cheat sheet or to look at the cheat sheet. Maybe for like something here or there, but like the cheat sheet was not going to save you. So I did allow the cheat sheet on the final exam. But the important thing was I said, all right, you guys are allowed cheat sheet front and back. Take all the information. Now, if you were to go through all the information that you were given throughout the whole year and try to condense it down to one sheet of paper, you'd be like overwhelmed. There's no way you're going to be able to do it. Well, I mean, I guess you could, but it's like it would take forever to do. So what I advised my students to do was like, hey, take every single cheat sheet that you created from chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. And then for each one of those, like break it down, summarize, you know, or just take the key important points and then put that on your final exam cheat sheet. So, you know, typically cheat sheet, I would say like it's going to take you about an hour to do. And so again, if you've already put in those hours for all those other chapters, then it should really only take like an extra hour to do that final exam. But it's so important to be able to summarize, to break down the things. I always like to think about it as like as the Cliff Notes version of your content, right? Like try to extract what is the most important things. How can you summarize all of the material or what you have learned? And yeah, like this kind of relates back to the teaching portion, right? Like, you know, how can you give somebody the Cliff Notes version, right? How can you give somebody a summary of what it is you're exactly learning? And I think it's important to write down those things, to summarize this information, because if you look at all that information and you're just like reviewing it, you're not going to internalize that stuff. What you need to do is you need to summarize it yourself, write down that summary, hence on a cheat sheet, my preferred method. But going through that process of like extracting what you feel is the most important, condensing it down, writing it down, summarizing it, putting it in your own words, thinking about it, how you would teach it, how you'd explain it to somebody else, is allowing your brain to be able to interpret that information so that you can actually recall it. Because if you're just going to be going through the motions, ladies and gentlemen, of just doing the problem and like just reviewing, the notes and stuff like that, it's not going to help. I mean, it will help, but it's going to be too overwhelming. There's too much content and too much information out there. So, I'd highly recommend like write that stuff down. So therefore you have it. So therefore you can use it. And writing down is like very helpful to like helping your brain like interpret that information. And I think if you spend your time going over problems that you know how to do, going over problems where you have the answer so you can get that feedback, working with a study partner or a group or somebody that you can try to teach or that you can be able to explain those problems to, and also just summarizing all of your work, that is how you actively learn. Just don't go through doing the problems and doing the routines. Actively learn through material, because I don't want you to end up like me. I don't want you to watch a movie, get highly motivated, say, this is what I'm going to do, and then do a whole bunch of stuff that actually never gets you there. I don't want you to be the student that is going to show up, spend hours and hours doing math problems, and then fail or bomb your math test, because it's a horrible feeling. It's a horrible feeling. And you feel like you are a failure. You feel like you can't learn. So you know what? Make sure you are studying correctly. And for those of you that have your exams coming up or a test coming up, I wish you the absolute best.